Sometimes, true heroes remain unseen, even in the most crowded places, until a single moment changes everything. At the prestigious NATO base, North Star Air Base, there was a pilot everyone knew of, but no one truly knew. She was quiet, like a shadow. Her name was Elara. No one really knew when she arrived at the base, which unit she transferred from, or even her exact rank. Her uniform bore no flashy insignia, and her career wasn't decorated with well-known tales of success. More often than not, she'd vanish into the base's back corridors, unnoticed. Among the other pilots, she had a peculiar reputation, though not one to boast about. Just Elara. Elara's presence was simply part of the base's routine, an overlooked detail, a whispered afterthought. No one wondered why she was so quiet, nor did anyone engage her in deep conversations. It was as if she were merely a robot, there solely to fulfill her duties. She often became the subject of mockery, especially among the younger, louder, and constantly self-promoting pilots. To them, Elara was just an example of mediocrity, a drab figure unsuited for aviation's dynamic, charismatic world.
But one day, she was assigned a mission everyone called impossible, and that flight would change not only her destiny, but the fate of the entire aviation world. So who was this woman, and why had no one spoken of her before? At North Star Air Base, there was a route known as the Ghost Wake Corridor. This was a flight path whose very name was chilling, one that had remained virtually unused for years. Its geography was incredibly deceptive, and its air currents were utterly unpredictable. It was as if the sky itself rejected this route. Even the most seasoned pilots had attempted it countless times in simulations, failing every single time. The most modern aircraft, the most advanced software had failed to unlock the corridor's secret. A whisper had spread throughout the base: if you enter there, you won't come back. Thus, the corridor was marked impassable in NATO records, like a curse. No one knew why this corridor had suddenly resurfaced, but one morning on the order board, Elara's name was listed alongside that ominous Ghost Wake corridor. The atmosphere within the base instantly shifted. Whispers turned first to surprise, then to ridicule. Elara? You can't be serious. She's going to fly that route? She can't even get out of her own shadow. Laughter erupted from rooms, sarcastic comments filled the air. The assignment of this pilot, with no rank or unit insignia, to such a mission was beyond comprehension. It felt like a cruel joke.
Elara, despite all the noise, maintained her silence. There was no sign of worry or fear on her face. She simply walked into the room, looked at her name on the order board, and calmly walked away. It was as if she felt not the slightest surprise at being given this mission. Everyone who knew her assumed this calm was either indifference or ignorance. Yet none of them knew that Elara had been living for this very moment for years. Visual 7. Elara had a small, dimly lit room of her own. It was one of the remotest corners of the base, typically serving a purpose akin to a lost and found. But for Elara, this place was a sanctuary. Its walls were covered with handmade maps, notes, and air current diagrams. Night after night, without anyone's knowledge, she would meticulously study every curve, every wind pattern, every air pocket of that impossible corridor. She gathered information not just from official data, but by listening to the memories of old pilots, the legends of local inhabitants, even the whispers of the wind itself. These maps weren't like conventional charts. They were reflections of the sky in Elara's mind. Days later, the flight day arrived. A strange silence hung over North Star Air Base. Everyone held their breath, seemingly waiting to witness the failure. Elara walked toward the cockpit early that morning. She wore her usual plain, unranked uniform. Her gaze was clear, her steps resolute. As she boarded her aircraft, even the accompanying technical crew looked on with a strange sadness. It felt like a farewell. For Elara, however, this was not a goodbye, but the beginning of a long-awaited reunion.
As the aircraft's engines began to hum, the tower controller called out with an unusual call sign. Ghost Wake, ready for departure. Yes, Ghost Wake. This was the call sign Elara had chosen for herself. No one understood why. It was as if the name itself had come from the sky. And at that moment, Elara was about to ascend from the shadows into the most challenging flight in history. But there was one thing no one knew. She had already completed this flight countless times, in her mind, in her soul, and on her handmade maps. As Elara's aircraft lifted off, a tense silence fell over North Star Air Base's control tower. The usually lively radio chatter was reduced to mere routine announcements. Everyone held their breath, tracking the small dot on the monitors. When Elara uttered the call sign, Ghost Wake, her voice was smooth and calm. There was no tremor, no sign of apprehension. It was as if she were embarking on an ordinary routine flight, but she was about to transcend the ordinary. Her aircraft glided through the clouds, heading towards the entrance of the Ghost Wake corridor. Below, the lines of the terrain gradually blurred, giving way to a gray, misty void. This wasn't ordinary fog. It was as if it were the very breath of the sky, making the route even more treacherous. One of the younger, arrogant pilots in the tower whispered, "They'll call her back in 10 minutes tops. This is a suicide mission." Another added, "Maybe they're trying to teach her a lesson. No one can get through that route." Computer simulations had yielded the same result for years: impassable. This was more than a perception. It was an accepted truth within the aviation community. But Elara had seen a different side of that truth. She was reading the sky in a language that technology couldn't comprehend, a language only intuition and deep understanding could decipher. As her aircraft entered the corridor's first dangerous section, the silence within the cockpit merged with the roar of the wind outside. Elara's eyes didn't fixate on the instruments. Instead, they roamed over the imaginary map she had meticulously drawn by hand for years, every detail etched into her memory. She knew precisely where each turbulence would begin, when the wind would shift direction, when the fog would intensify. When the first shockwave hit, the aircraft shuddered. On the tower's monitors, Elara's altitude seemed to suddenly drop. One of the young pilots scoffed, "There she goes." But within seconds, Elara executed an unexpected maneuver. She banked the aircraft sharply, entering an air current no one could have predicted, and suddenly ascended. This was a move considered a fatal error in simulations. But for Elara, it was part of the dance. She wasn't just controlling a machine, she was using the aircraft as an extension of her own body. Her every reaction was as if she had formed a telepathic connection with the plane. The cold, technological environment of the cockpit had seemingly come alive with her touch. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere in the tower began to change. Scoffing whispers gave way to astonishment, then to admiration. Elara was navigating through the corridor's most dangerous, narrowest, and most complex sections. Even where radio signals cut out and radars went blind, she didn't deviate from her path. Her flight wasn't the flawless execution of a plan. It was an impromptu conversation with the sky itself. She listened to every whisper of the wind, read every movement of the clouds, and adapted to every elevation of the terrain. This wasn't merely piloting, it was a work of art. The seasoned commander in the control tower watched the monitors in silence. He hadn't seen such a perfect flight in years. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice filled with awe. "No pilot could fly this route so fluidly." But Elara was flying it. Every turn was sharp, every altitude change seamless. It was as if she had pre-visited every inch of the corridor, knew every air pocket like the back of her hand. In Elara's mind, this flight was already complete. The days, the weeks of solitary preparation, the meticulous detailing of every single aspect had prepared her for this moment. She was carrying not just an aircraft, but her own fears, the doubts of others, and all that silent ridicule. And every successful maneuver was proof of how powerful that silence could become a storm. This moment wasn't just a turning point for Elara, but for everyone watching. It was a woman's transcendence beyond all expectations and boundaries. So, how would this flight change Elara's life? And how would the Ghost Wake legend echo through the walls of North Star Air Base forever?
When Elara's aircraft emerged from the Ghost Wake corridor, the control tower held its breath for a moment. As the small dot on the monitor entered the green zone, the controllers and pilots in the tower broke their silence, looking at each other. Astonishment, admiration, and perhaps a hint of shame were etched on their faces. This was not just the successful completion of a mission, it was the birth of a legend. As the aircraft descended, a strange atmosphere settled over North Star Air Base. Normally, when a pilot returned from a successful mission, there would be applause, cheers, and enthusiastic welcomes. But Elara's return was different. Everyone watched her, but no one knew what to say or how to react. The silence was filled with a whisper of admiration. When Elara stepped out of her aircraft, her face bore the same calm expression as always. It was as if she had just returned from an ordinary training flight. Her gaze wasn't fixed on the astonished crowd around her, but rather far off into the depths of the sky. The base commander, an elderly and experienced pilot, slowly walked towards Elara. His face showed deep respect. "Elara," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "how did you do it?" No simulation, no technology indicated that this route could be flown so flawlessly. Elara smiled. It was a rare, genuine smile. "The sky," she simply said, "tells everything to those who know how to listen."
This answer impressed the commander even more. For years, they had relied solely on machine power, technology, and data, yet Elara had shown them the power of human intuition, harmony with nature, and a deep inner connection. That day, at North Star Air Base, not only was a flight completed, but a new chapter in aviation philosophy was opened. The Ghost Wake corridor was no longer referred to as impassable, but as Elara's route. From that day forward, Elara's name, along with the call sign Ghost Wake, was added to official records. She was no longer the pilot with no rank, but the woman who changed NATO standards, who achieved the impossible. But she wasn't affected by this fame. She remained quiet, still wandering the dim corridors of the base on her own. For her, the real reward was the unique bond she had forged with the sky, the ability to hear the whispers of the wind. Elara's story sparked a silent revolution in aviation history. People began to believe not only in technology, but also in humanity's inner strength, intuition, and deep connection with nature. Elara left a lasting mark, far from ostentatious heroism, often overlooked, but with an impact that would last a lifetime. She was not just a pilot, she was a legend who transcended boundaries, proving the power of the unseen. And sometimes, the greatest victories are won in the quietest moments. Elara's story was about those who make a difference, quietly, yet profoundly. So who are the unseen heroes in your life? Or perhaps, are you an Elara waiting to be noticed? If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives like this. Share your thoughts on Elara's story and what it means to you in the comments below. Every single one of your comments gives us the power to discover new stories.